C'est bon, tu m'entends. Merci.
Si, c'est bon. Okay. Matthieu Hartenstein. Bonjour à tous. Donc, je suis Jean-Luc Thomas du laboratoire L'Aume du Mans et j'ai l'honneur de présider ce jury. Voilà. Je suis très, très content. Et donc je vais peut-être parler un peu anglais. I'm going to introduce you as a jury. So we have two reviewers. First one is Efren Fernandez Grande from Madrid, the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. Le premier rapporteur. Le deuxième rapporteur, c'est Gilles Chardon, qui est maître de conférence à Centrale Supélec, Université Paris-Saclay. Ensuite, nous avons les examinateurs. So the examiners is Christoph Perschmann from the Institute of Computer and Communication Technology of Köln, Germany. So, I think it's Cologne, en Allemagne. And then we have Quentin Leclerc from the LVA laboratory in Lyon, INSA. Then we have Thomas Elie, professor at IRCAM. We have also Claudia Fritz from here, I think, Institut d'Alembert. I think it's okay for the jury. And then we have the supervisors who are, yes, one is missing here. Oh. Yes, Fabrice Silva from Marseille, from the LMA, and François Olivier, who is the supervisor of the thesis from here. So, Matthieu Hartenstein, you have 45 minutes to present your work, and then we will ask some questions. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you everyone for attending my PhD defense. My thesis is entitled Reconstructing the high-order far-field directivity of a sound source, and more particularly, we focused on measuring the three-dimensional directivity of human voice. My PhD project was held at Institut Jean-Laurent d'Alembert in Jussieu, in this university, Sorbonne. And part of the thesis was performed at LMA. In the respective institutes, I was supervised by François Olivier, my thesis director, and Fabrice Silva. To start with, here is an illustrative example of how the directivity of a sound source, and more particularly that of human voice, manifests itself in everyday life. In this example, a teacher is trying to deliver a message to his students. Studies have shown that when speaking and singing, significant amounts of information can be radiated quite directively. In this simplistic example, we make the assumption that a part of the information is only radiated into this cone here. What you can see on the picture is that despite the reflection of the incident wave on the window on the left, some students will never have access to this part of the information. Our brains are capable of reconstructing a missing part of a discourse. However, this task is laborious, which can lead to losses of attention. This is, of course, problematic in a learning environment, but also in a meeting room or in a theater. This example should have convinced you that it's necessary to take into account the directivity model of the sound sources when designing an acoustic space. Fortunately, most room acoustic softwares, such as Odeon, which is this figure is taken from Odeon's website, actually. Most room acoustic softwares allow to take into account the directivity of sound sources. Furthermore, including directivity models of the sound sources that are incorporated in a virtual audio space enhances the realness the naturalness, sorry, of the audio scene. Now that we have seen some examples of application of the directivity function of a sound source, let's define it scientifically. The directivity function is the data of the pressure field in all directions measured at a fixed distance from the source. And more specifically, the far-field directivity function gives the pressure field in all directions measured sufficiently far away from the source. And I'll come back later to what I mean here by sufficiently far away. In the literature, several setups have been proposed in order to measure the directivity of a sound source. The one depicted here uses a horizontal arc of microphone in order to measure the directivity of a human singer. This kind of setup allows to measure the directivity of a sound source synchronously. And as the microphones lay on the plane and don't span the entire space, this allows for a highly resoluted directivity function. However, the radiation of natural sources is intrinsically three-dimensional, and this setup doesn't allow to capture the directivity in all the dimensions of space. In this second setup, a vertical arc of microphone is rotated sequentially around the source, while the source is asked to repeat the same acoustic content a certain amount of times. This allows for a three-dimensional measurement of a highly resoluted directivity function. However, the measurements in this case are not synchronous, which can represent a limitation when analyzing the radiation of natural sound sources, such as human voice. This last setup depicted at the bottom of the slide consists in a few dozens of microphones placed at predetermined positions at the surface of the sphere. This kind of setup allows for three-dimensional synchronous measurements of the directivity function. However, a highly resolution would typically demand hundreds of sensors to be deployed, which is hardly feasible with conventional acquisition systems. Note that all the measurement setups depicted here present sizes of 2 to 3.6 meters. This example illustrates that the acoustic community is lacking a means of measuring the three-dimensional directivity of a sound source, and more particularly of human voice, synchronously with a high resolution. This leads us to the goal of my PhD thesis, which was to propose an experimental framework that allows for such measurements. At the beginning of the project, we quickly realized that placing hundreds of sensors on a sphere, exactly at the surface of a sphere, is laborious, is cumbersome. Therefore, we decided to make use of an indirect acoustic imaging technique that allows for the reconstruction of a directivity function from measurements made on the surface of arbitrary geometry. The research questions that will be answered in the presentation are the following. First of all, what array and processing parameters most significantly impact the quality of the reconstruction? Then, can the resolution, the reconstruction error, and the usable bandwidth of the method be either predicted from numerical simulations or assessed using experimental data? And eventually, does the proposed framework allow to reconstruct the complexity and the variability of human voice directivity? The remaining of the presentation will consist in 4 different parts. In the second section of the presentation, I will be describing the experimental framework that we defined during the thesis. The third part of the presentation will present an analysis of the performance of the methods based on both numerical simulations and theoretical considerations. The fourth part of the presentation will present the main experimental results that we obtained during the thesis. And eventually, conclusions will be drawn from today's presentation. In order to deploy the arrays of hundreds of microphones that were used in the thesis, we decided to make use of a technology that has been developed at Institut Jean Le Rond d'Alembert in the last decade. This technology is called megamicros, and it allows for the synchronous measurement, the synchronous recording of signals measured by up to 1,024 MEMS microphones. On the picture on the left, you can see that the MEMS microphones that constitute the megamicros system are interconnected by groups of 8. This is slightly constraining for the spatial distribution of points. However, this is also quite practical, as 8 microphones can be placed at once on the measurement surface. Megamicros has been used in different research projects in the past years. This first example is taken from Raphael Leiba's PhD thesis. In this example, a large-scale array is deployed outdoors and allows and enables the localization of noise sources on a transport vehicle. In this second example from Hugo de Montis' PhD thesis, a microphone array of 1,024 sensors is deployed on the walls of a reverberant chamber. This allows for both the localization and the identification of the sound sources. The megamicros system, therefore, seemed to be an appropriate candidate for the deployment of the microphone arrays that were to be used in the thesis. This first microphone array was deployed at Institut Jean Le Rond d'Alembert in the anechoical chamber of Institut Jean Le Rond d'Alembert, and it consists in 256 microphones placed at the surface of a cube of side 1.2 meters. 1.2 meter. This array is quite This array is quite convenient for analyzing the fields radiated by a rather small sound source, such as this loudspeaker here. However, we have seen in the introduction that most setups dedicated to measurements of human voice directivity typically consist in sizes of more than 2 meters. Therefore, we deployed an additional microphone array in the anechoical chamber of Laboratoire de Mécanique et d'Acoustique in Marseille. This array consists in 960 microphones deployed at the surface of a quasi-sphere of diameter 3.6 meters. Unfortunately, as of today, only 588 microphones can be synchronously recorded, but the remaining microphones should be made exploitable in the short term. The microphone arrays that were depicted in the last slide allow to measure a signal of n-time time samples at each measurement positions. However, the directivity function of a sound source is generally expressed and analyzed in the frequency domain. Therefore, the first step of our signal processing framework is to perform a frequency analysis of each measured signal, which results in a frequency spectrum of n-frec frequency samples at each measurement point. The last step of our framework is to perform the a spatial processing step that allows for the reconstruction of a directivity function at each frequency of interest. The choice of an angular grid of directions for the representation of a directivity is application dependent. Therefore, it may be convenient to represent the directivity function as an equivalent representation. A convenient representation for a radiated field and for a directivity function is the coefficients of its spherical wave decomposition. Luckily, the method that we choose allows the spherical wave coefficients. So the spherical wave coefficients are a byproduct of the method that we chose to use. Now let's introduce a bit of theory on the acoustic theory of waves. So the pressure fields around the sound source can be decomposed at a given frequency as an infinite sum of spherical harmonics, of spherical waves, sorry. The spherical waves are the product of an angular dependence to a radial dependence. The angular dependence is given by the spherical harmonic functions. These functions are indexed using two integers, the first of which being the order, and which gives the spatial complexity of the given spherical harmonic function. So for n equals 0, you have a monopole. For n equals 1, for n equals 1, you have 3 different dipoles, etc. And at a fixed order, the degree of the spherical harmonic function gives the orientation, the spatial orientation of this function. As for the radial dependence, it's given by the spherical Hankel functions. Their behavior will be reminded later in the presentation. The coefficients of the spherical wave expansion are in general unknown for a natural sound source. And the method that we chose to use relies on the estimation of these coefficients. The imaging method that we chose in order to reconstruct a directivity function is called the Helmholtz equation least squares method. It is commonly abbreviated as HELS, and that's how I'm going to call it in the remaining of the presentation. The HELS method consists in approximated each pressure measurement at a given frequency as a finite sum of spherical wave functions. Once this approximation is made for each pressure measurements, the vector of measured pressures at a given frequency can be approximated by a transfer matrix of spherical waves sampled at the measurement positions to a vector of coefficients that is unknown. The vector of spherical wave coefficients can be estimated by inverting the inverse problem on the right as in the least square sense, hence the name of the method. Eventually, the last step of the method is to estimate a far-field directivity function at a given frequency from the estimated spherical coefficients of the decomposition. Now that we have presented the method that was defined during the thesis, it is time to analyze its performance in terms of both numerical simulations and theoretical considerations. First of all, I'm going to present the results of numerical simulations. The simulations were all made using the same source model, which is called as the spherical cap. This source consists in a rigid sphere, depicted in blue, that is topped by a uniformly vibrating cap. Quite conveniently, this source admits theoretical spherical wave decomposition. In the simulations, this source was placed in several microphone arrays of different sizes, numbers of microphones, and shapes. In order to assess the performance of the method, we chose to define a relative error between the estimated spherical wave coefficients and the true coefficients of the decomposition that are known here. Quite conveniently, this performance metric can be shown to be equivalent to a far-field directivity reconstruction error. Several sources of uncertainty were included in the simulations. For this reason, the performance metric is stochastic, and therefore a certain amount of Monte Carlo runs were to be made in order to estimate the statistics of the performance metric. First of all, let's assess the impact of measurement noise on the quality of the reconstruction. In orange is depicted the frequency behavior of the reconstruction error in the noiseless case, which corresponds to an infinite signal-to-noise ratio. In this particular case, the reconstruction error can be seen to not depend on frequency. When noise is included in a measurement model, which is represented as a blue curve here, the reconstruction error can be seen to oscillate with frequency around a value that actually doesn't really depend on frequency. The MEMS microphones that were used in the thesis were characterized using making two different calibration experiments. These experiments allowed to quantify both the average response of our sensors and the variability in response. The results that are shown here assess the impact of the measured response variability on the quality of the reconstruction. As you can see, on the lower frequency range, the response variability doesn't have a very significant impact on the reconstruction, and the reconstruction error slightly increases with frequency, at higher frequency. When working with arrays composed of hundreds of microphones, localizing the position of each sensor cannot be made individually with an optical device. This would be cumbersome, and this would lead to imprecisions. For this reason, we decided to make use of an acoustic localization method that was proposed by Charles van Zwinberg in 2019. This method consists in playing a sound signal from different positions around and inside the array, and it allows for the estimation of both the sensor positions and the source positions. After slightly adapting the method to our needs, we obtained the following reconstruction of the positions. The larger dots on the figure represent sources that actually can't be seen on the picture on the left. But the smaller dots represent the reconstructed positions of the sensors, which seem to agree pretty well with the geometry of the array shown on the left. Prior to the acoustic localization experiments, we had made use of an optical device, a high-precision optical device, which enabled to precisely localize approximately 30 MEMS microphones of the array. The comparison of the positions of the sensors that were retrieved acoustically with the ones of that were measured optically yielded experimental root mean square errors of 7.5 millimeter. For comparison, in the original paper from Charles van Zwinberg, a 2 centimeter error was found. Now that we have assessed the microphone positioning error that is inherent to our directivity measurements, let's evaluate the impact of this microphone positioning error on the reconstruction error, on the directivity reconstruction error. This is shown as a green curve on this graph. And as you can see, at lower frequency, the microphone positioning error can be seen to not have a significant impact on the quality of the reconstruction. However, the directivity reconstruction error in presence of microphone positioning error increases with frequency. This is due to the fact that the microphone positioning error becomes more and more comparable to the acoustic wavelength as the frequency increases. Now that we have assessed the impact of each source of uncertainty independently, let's see the frequency evolution of the reconstruction error when all sources of uncertainty are included in the measurement model. This is represented by the green curve on this figure. For comparison, here is the reconstruction error that is obtained on the lower frequency range when only measurement noise is included in the model. What you can see on this picture is that the purple and green curves seem to, they yield they present really similar, very similar behavior up to 1.5 kilohertz, which yields the conclusion that measurement noise is the most significant source of uncertainty at lower frequencies. The blue curve on this figure depicts the impact of the microphone positioning error isolated from the other sources of uncertainty on the reconstruction error. As you can see, from 1.5 kilohertz, the green and blue curves present very similar values, which shows that the microphone positioning error is the most significant source of error at higher frequencies. The first set of simulations that were presented in the last slides allowed to assess the impact of different sources of uncertainty on the quality of the reconstruction. On this slide, I will present a parametric analysis of the influence of the different parameters that are involved in the design of an array on the quality of the reconstruction. On this first set of simulations, two microphone arrays of similar numbers of sensors and similar sizes were used, and only the geometries of these arrays was different. Oh, sorry. The blue curves represent the reconstruction error for a spherical array, and the green curve represents the reconstruction error for a cube-shaped array. As you can see, up to a very high frequency of 6 kilohertz, both arrays present very similar error levels. It's only from 6 kilohertz that the spherical array will give a better directivity reconstruction. In the second set of simulations, two different arrays of same size and geometry were used, and the number of sensors was made to vary. A striking result from seen on these curves is that using a higher number of microphones yields better reconstructions only at higher frequency. This is actually due to the fact that the radiated field is less complex at lower frequency, which demands less sensors and a lower resolution to be captured accurately. In this last set of simulations, two arrays of same geometry, numbers of sensors are used, and the size of the array is made to vary. You can see that both sizes yield very similar reconstruction errors, but a smaller array presents an accident in the reconstruction error at very low frequency. This behavior can be explained by analyzing the radial dependence of the spherical waves. As I've said in the second part of the presentation, the radial dependence of the spherical waves is given by the spherical Hankel functions. Here I represent the behavior, the radial dependence of the Hankel functions normalized by the Hankel function of order 0. The results are presented for a given frequency, and it's only the amplitude of the spherical Hankel waves that are presented here. As can be seen on this figure, all the spherical Hankel waves, the spherical Hankel functions, present the same asymptotes at far away from the source. However, close to the source, the spherical Hankel functions are shown to decay with the radius, and the rate of this decay is stronger for higher order waves. Therefore, at a low frequency and at a given and at a small observation radius, the spherical Hankel functions will present the spherical Hankel functions of higher order will present magnitudes significantly higher than the spherical functions of lower orders. Regarding the transfer matrix of the HELS inverse problem. This has the following impact. So the magnitudes of the columns of this matrix are mainly given by the Hankel functions. And the behavior of this amplitude discrepancy in terms of Hankel functions will induce large discrepancies in the magnitudes of the transfer matrices columns, columns. This represents a source of numerical instability when inverting the HELS inverse problem. To overcome this issue, we proposed the far-field truncation criterion, which is made on the assumption, it's important to remember that in this project, we are mainly interested in far-field quantities. Therefore, we propose to only include in the spherical wave basis waves that have reached their far-field asymptote at a given frequency and at the measurement radius. This allows for getting rid of the low frequency instability that was observed for smaller arrays. The last slide has shown that the truncation order could be used as a mean of mitigating the low frequency instability of the inverse problem for smaller arrays. However, of course, the truncation order of the spherical wave basis should be chosen also in consideration of the spatial distribution of points that the array presents. For analyzing the quality of a given distribution of points to be used with a particular acoustic imaging method, a commonly used quantity is the Gram matrix. The Gram matrix is given by the following formula, and its coefficients are simply the correlations between the spherical waves of the basis sampled at the array positions. To guarantee the uniqueness of the reconstruction of the solution of the HELS inverse problem, it would be preferable that all the spherical waves included in the basis are perfectly uncorrelated, which would yield a diagonal Gram matrix. However, in practice, non-null of diagonal correlations can be observed in the Gram matrix. This is a source of spatial aliasing, which is to be avoided when performing acoustic imaging. Here I represent the behavior of the Gram matrix at a given frequency of approximately 2 kHz for the quasi-spherical array that we deployed during the project. As you can see, the Gram matrix presents very weak of diagonal contributions up to order 9, which is a proof that almost no aliasing occurs at these orders. However, from order 10, stronger correlations will be obtained. Stronger correlations can be found in the matrix. Therefore, the Gram matrix allows to define a maximal truncation order for the spherical array that was deployed. Here is the Gram matrix of the cube-shaped array that we deployed is observed on the right of this slide. And as you can see, it presents weak correlations on the whole range of orders. However, defining a threshold in the values of acceptable correlation coefficients, we managed to define a maximum working order of 9 for this array as well. This part of the presentation allowed to start answering 2 research questions that were asked in the introduction of the presentation. First of all, the impact of different sources of uncertainty was assessed in terms of a reconstruction error that was proposed. Then a parametric analysis of the influence of different array parameters highlighting the fact that only the number of sensors truly matters when designing an array and using it with the HCLS method. Then the truncation order was shown to be the essential parameter of the HCLS problem. On the lower frequency range and for smaller arrays, it's allowed to get rid of the instability of the HCLS problem. And the analysis of the Graham matrix allowed to identify a maximum truncation order for a given distribution of points. It is now time to present the main experimental results obtained during my thesis. So in real-life experiments, the spherical wave coefficients are not known and are actually the main unknown of the problem. Therefore, the error on spherical wave coefficient estimation that was introduced in the third part of the presentation cannot be computed. To overcome this issue, we decided to make use of cross-validation. Here on the left, on the graph on the left, the different color points represent all the points of a given measurement system. Cross-validation consists in dividing the set of measurement points into different validation subsets represented by different colors here. For each validation subset, the part of the measurement points that are not part of the validation set, so the orange, green, and red points on this figure can be used to estimate vector of spherical wave coefficients for this particular validation subset. Then this vector of coefficients can be used to reconstruct pressure values on the points of the validation set. This can be done for each validation subset, allowing to obtain pressure reconstructions for each of the measurement points. Eventually, an error between the reconstructed pressures and the measured ones can be computed. This performance metric will be referred to as the cross-validation error. When analyzing the field radiated by a given source, for example, this control source that is depicted on the left, the behavior of the cross-validation in function of the truncation order can be analyzed. This is represented on these two different graphs at two different frequencies and for the two arrays that were deployed during the thesis. And as you can see on these figures, the cross-validation error decreases for increasing orders at lower orders, and it presents a lower plateau at higher orders. This shows that the cross-validation error presents a minimal value that allows to identify an optimal truncation order for the HCLS method. The remaining of the presentation represents the results of measurements made on 4 different human singers, uttering the 5 most common, uttering glissandi of the 5 most common French vowels. For the measurements, the quasi-spherical array was used, and the frequency analysis consisted in the estimation of cross spectra between the measurements made by each microphone and the measurements made by a reference frontal microphone. On this figure, I present the evolution of the cross-validation error with the truncation order. A first interesting result that has to be noted is that the cross-validation error presents similar values on a broad, close to minimal values on a broad range of orders. This represents an ambiguity when choosing a the minimum of the cross-validation error or the optimal truncation order. In order to mitigate this ambiguity, we decided to add an additional stability constraint in order for choosing the optimal order. The resulting optimal orders are shown as vertical lines on this graph. As you can see, consistent optimal orders are obtained for different vowels. This is at a given frequency and for a given singer. I didn't say that. now that we have identified an optimal value of the truncation order for a given array, measuring a specific singer and measuring a specific singer, I represent the frequency evolution of the optimal truncation order for different singers across averaged across singers. Sorry. Okay, the colored curves represent the truncation order averaged across phonemes for a given singer, and the black curve represents the average truncation order across singers. As can be observed on this curve, slight discrepancies are obtained between the different singers. This might be due to different spatial complexities of the sound field, depending on the size of the body, for example. No, not for example. Never mind. All these curves represent an increasing trend with frequency, which is due to the fact that the spatial complexity of the field becomes more and more significant with increasing frequency, demanding a higher truncation order to be represented, to be captured. And eventually, the maximal working order of the spherical array, so order 9, is reached around frequencies of 2 to 3.5 kilohertz, depending on the singer. So actually, sorry, I made a mistake here. It's more something close to 2 to something close to 3 kilohertz. Here I represent the frequency evolution of the cross-validation error for different singers, represented as color curves for different singers, and the average across singers is represented by a black curve. So it is noticeable that all the curves obtained for different singers are very similar up to a certain frequency, and they present similar frequency increases. This error increase in this frequency range is likely due to the microphone positioning error that was identified that was analyzed in the second part of the presentation. However, at higher frequency, the error obtained for different singers starts to increase at a higher rate, which is symptomatic of the order of the array being not high enough to capture the whole spatial complexity of the sound fields at higher frequency. So from 2 to 3.5 kilohertz for the different singers, 2 to 3.5 kilohertz. This allows to define a usable bandwidth for the method for a given singer in a given array. In the remaining of the presentation, I will present some directivities measured on different singers, and I will compare them with the results obtained, with directivities simulated using a numerical model of a mock body. So on these representations, here I show an horizontal directivity represented in the frequency angle plane. In this representation, the x-axis corresponds to the frequency axis, and the y-axis corresponds to the angle between the frontal direction and any arbitrary angle in the horizontal plane. As you can see, at most frequency, the frontal direction is the main radiation direction in the horizontal plane. However, at some frequencies, symmetrical lobes according to the frontal direction appear in the directivities, making, as a result, the frontal direction is not the maximum direction anymore. This shows the frequency evolution of the vertical directivity, so the directivity measured in the vertical plane, reconstructed in the vertical plane. And a striking result here that has already been observed in the literature is that the horizontal direction is almost never the main radiation direction in the vertical plane. This is a quite interesting result. In a nutshell, the simulated and measured directivities seem to agree pretty well, despite some frequency shifts that are likely due to different sizes in the size of the mock body and in the size of the real human body. To the final result that is represented here shows examples of reconstructed three-dimensional directivities at different frequencies for different singers uttering different vowels. So this means of representation is called a balloon plot, and the radius and color of the balloon in a given direction gives the sound intensity radiated in this direction, normalized by the maximum intensity. A striking results that can be observed here is that slight differences have been can be identified from the analysis of these balloons, both for for the same singer uttering different vowels, and also the differences between singers between two singers uttering the same vowel are also noticeable. This last part of the presentation has led to the following conclusions. First of all, the cross-validation framework enabled the identification of both an optimal truncation order for the study of one source in a given array, and also a usable frequency band for the method for studying this source in a particular array. Typical bandwidths that were obtained with the order 9 quasi-spherical arrays. The reconstructed directivities are fully reconstructed with a certain amount of error, of course, up to 2 to 3.5 kilohertz. And for comparison, the synchronous spherical array that was presented in the introduction allows for measurements up to order 5, which, according to our results, can yield a full reconstruction of the sound field only up to frequencies of 1 kilohertz. Finally, the reconstructed directivities were shown to compare well with simulated ones, and the reconstructed directivities were enabled to identify slight differences between individuals and between vowels pronounced by different individuals. These results allow to draw general conclusions from the presentation. First of all, a framework was proposed to synchronously measure highly resoluted three-dimensional directivities. The method presents the advantage of being applicable to any array geometry. The order limitation of a given array was shown to depend on both the size of the array at lower frequency and also on the distribution of points, of course. Cross-validation enabled to identify an optimal truncation order in the order limitation of the deployed arrays for a given source. And the order 9 quasi-spherical array of 588 microphones has yielded consistent directivity reconstructions for human voice up to 2 to 3.5 kilohertz, depending on the singer. As perspectives, we foresee the following perspectives for this work. First of all, the proposed framework could be used to complement studies on the analysis of human voice directivity. The proposed framework could also allow to build a database of directivity of natural sources. It could be also extended to other sources, of course. And eventually, further studies on the spatial perception of sound could be performed using the directivities that were measured in this thesis. I think I'm done here, so thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Matthieu, for the nice presentation. Now it's time for